Go ahead.
One who needs only 2 pages to really screw you.
Hi, Francis. Could we talk about, specifically for me, 3 states of being or 3 states of consciousness: deep dreamless sleep, the gap between perceptions, and turiya? Are these very, 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 very subtle forms?
No, out of these 3 states, 2 are the same. Turiya and the gap between 2 perceptions are the same. This experience is also called sometimes nirvikalpa samadhi, which is the state without perception. And so these 2 are identical. And what turiya means, it means the 4 state, which obviously differentiates it from the 3 other states: waking state, dream state, deep sleep state. It is the common background of all the states. That's why so the 4 states, the common background of all the states manifests in the intervals between the states, including the interval between perceptions. Now, deep sleep state is a state which still has objectivity, meaning still there are perceptions. However, there is a greater scarcity of perception in the deep sleep state. And the deep sleep state, it's different from the dream state in that sense that the dream state is still an organized state. There is still meaning in a dream. You see what I mean? I still drive a car, and then this car later on becomes my bathtub, and I am in my bathtub, right? And then all of a sudden I am in a different country. I have navigated with my bathtub to... But, you see, there is still a seeming story. Of course, the story doesn't have the same reliability or the same, consistency as the story that we have, the convolution product of the signals, right? Is much stronger in the waking state, in the dream state, much less. And then even this residual consistency from one moment to the next get lost in the deep sleep state, which is a state of deep relaxation. That's when they do the big maintenance. You see, when you have a service provider on the internet, normally you have the normal service, right? And during the normal service, you get full service. Then sometimes they do some maintenance at night, and then you have a very limited service, but you have still some service. You can check your email. But then sometimes also they send you an email to inform you that from 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. Pacific time, there will be 0 service. Because they need, to do something that they need to shut down the damn thing. And that's deep sleep. So it doesn't mean that there are no perceptions in deep sleep, but they are not correlated one to another. There are neurons still firing, and so you may have vision, thoughts, senses, seeming sense perception, but it's meaningless. Now, because there is a greater greater scarcity of perceptions between the perception, the piece of the background of the fourth state shines through. It is to compare that, the waking state will be like a fabric which has a 200 thread, you count a 200 thread count, and the dream state like a 50 thread count, and then the deep sleep would be like 3 threads, full of holes. So that's the idea. That's why, as we wake up, we have the perfume of the deep sleep still present, because through this very loose fabric, the perfume of the background was... So the deep sleep is a happy state.
And Turiya exists as the background in all 3 states, like the gap. A new question comes, and it comes from that, but it's like the perception for me is that consciousness doesn't need this body to perceive. That even because it's all-knowing, if I want to call that perceiving. So is it correct to say that a person, or not person, but consciousness is in the state of Turiya?
No.
Where intelligence is?
Consciousness is Turiya. There is no difference between consciousness and consciousnessing. We make this difference with objects, because we make, on the objective realm, we make a difference with an object which is static, so we give it a noun, and an activity which is dynamic, we give it a verb. But consciousness not being an object, you see, it is both consciousness and consciousnessing, and neither. You see, that's why it's difficult to use words that apply to objects for something that is not an object. You see, so it's...
When you refer to our natural state, you're referring to Turiya?
No. That's something else. Although we may have realized we may have seen the universality and therefore also the eternity of consciousness in Turiya, in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. When the objects of the world or of the dream come back, we may, due to old habits, see these objects still as different from the piece out of which they emanate. And we may still have the desire to go back to the piece, which creates a residual dynamism. In other words, we are dissatisfied with the objects that are present, and we want to go back to this state of peace. There is still a duality here. We have to understand at that moment, we have to be informed at that moment that since the objects appear in consciousness, exist in consciousness, and vanish back in consciousness, meaning in Turiya, their true nature is nothing else than Turiya. Just as the true nature of reflections in a mirror is the mirror, right? Not completely true for a physicist, but we leave it at that. So when that is understood and digested, then there is no difference between consciousness without objects, Turiya, and consciousness in the presence of objects. When we achieve this equanimity, it's called the natural state. In India, we have a name for everything, they call it Sahaja Samadhi. They make a distinction between Nirvikalpa Samadhi is the experience of consciousness in the absence of forms, of vikalpas. Sahaja Samadhi is the experience of consciousness both in the absence and in the presence of forms. So then we are always at peace. We don't need to go anywhere else. Everything which is there is this universal consciousness which we are. You see, that's true non-duality at that moment, or at this state.
Are either of those absolute?
What is absolute is consciousness. Because it is the same consciousness that is the substance of everything and the reality of everything. So the absolute is consciousness. The absolute exists both, if you will, both at rest and in motion. At rest as pure consciousness, in motion as manifestation.
So it's that last state you just mentioned, not Nirvikalpa Samadhi, but the one after that.
Sahaja Samadhi, the natural state. The natural state. But this natural state is in distinction with ignorance. These states are explained pedagogically to make a distinction between this experience and ignorance, because it is also consciousness that experiences ignorance out of its own decision and choice. Ignorance appears in consciousness, right? It's like when if we decide to play cops and robbers, there are moments when, although we have decided to be a robber, we believe to be truly a robber and to be truly jailed, right? In this moment we are in ignorance of our true nature, which is a kid playing on the meadow.
I guess what's confusing me is maybe a perception I've had that's been incorrect, that absolute is inconceivable.
It's
not
absolutely,
perceivable.
that's very true. It's inconceivable.
But yet it exists manifested and unmanifested? it would be
Yes.
conceivable in manifestation?
Well, here it is, manifested. That's it. You have it here. And when you think about consciousness, if you ask yourself the question, am I conscious? And you go to an experience from which you derive the answer, yes, I am conscious, there is consciousness beyond the shadow of a doubt. This experience is Nirvikalpa Samadhi, out of which you derive this. That's the experience of Turiya, out of which you derive. It's from the experience of consciousness that you know that consciousness exists.
Mm-hmm.
However, it is also from the experience of consciousness that we may know that consciousness is universal and absolute, if you will. That is the true liberating experience. It's not sufficient to know that there is consciousness. It is sufficient, however, to know that consciousness is absolutely real. Something real is something which doesn't depend on something else for its existence. If I want to kind of logically or mathematically define what I mean by real.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot to digest right now. Thank you.